Well, here we are on a Saturday. Let me get the share up here so I can get with the outline and get on with everything. We're just having a little technical issue with the video. I think I have it. But anyway, this part's good. So we'll start with this. So anyway, if you're new, welcome. We start, like I said, about 3 minutes past the hour. And this presentation is about IFR, the IFR ACS and the CFII PTS explained. And so this is a fairly technical, I said it's a fairly technical presentation. In some ways, there's a lot of reference to FAR, but the outline is quite detailed. So in this outline that you get, it's in the, should be in the chat, but then you get a copy of it by email anyway, if you're on a list. So we'll send it to you. So if you're studying for your IFR or your CFII, this would be very valuable, I think, to you. For the people who are studying for the IFR, it's to be sure your flight instructor did everything they were supposed to. And we're aware of some recent legal interpretations and some other things. So that's what's in here. And we're going to look at each of these documents. So you've seen them before. You know, when I did practical tests for the FAA, I was astonished that people would come in for a practical test and never have seen the PTS before. Never. They just relied on the instructor exclusively and never once looked at it. I'm like, wow. You wouldn't like, but for whatever reason, like the FAA knowledge test, they looked at all the questions and answers there, right? to take the test, right? There was some system there, but evidently there's not a good enough system. So I find that's very odd that we don't. And also I find that all or most students or pilots in training don't look at the logbook endorsement or know what's required or not. I think it's not really, they probably don't need to necessarily know everything, but to know would help you then know if you're going to be ready for this test, because last thing you want to do is go into a test and not be qualified, either not have the correct endorsement or be missing some time requirement. There's no more time in the universe to get it. So that's what we're trying to avoid. In addition, I'll talk about the CFII, what things you can do with it and why it's, how you can actually get your CFI a little quicker in a particular way. I'm gonna tell you, so we'll go into that. And then, so let's just do that. So what I want to do is I want to identify, here, I'll just bring up this little pen here so we can see. I want to identify the training, the endorsements and testing requirements for both the instrument rating and for the CFII. If you come to CFI Bootcamp, one of the things we do is we cover the regulations from a top-down view. So we never cover them by reading them. I have already summarized what's in every regulation and we teach from that. And then you go home and you read the regulation because then you know what you're looking for in the regulation. But one of the things we do when we get up to the endorsements is we identify three things in all cases except for the student pilots. We want to identify the training that's required. We want to identify the endorsement that's required for whether scenario I'm pitching to you, and then testing requirements. So testing, there's no testing for the student pilot. So the student pilot only need to talk about training, with the required training, and then what endorsements are required. And then all the other ratings, like we do things like from a rotorcraft pilot, helicopter to airplane, single engine land, commercial to commercial, something like that. So we identify the training, the endorsements, and the testing for all the scenarios. We do have a book called Scenarios and Endorsements. Now it's not, there's no scenarios in there for the instrument stuff yet, but there are 27 different scenarios, all from solo to student pilot, sending them within 25 miles cross country. And then there's glider to airplane, and you can imagine flight review. And there are scenarios we pitch. And then there's a solution in words, and there's usually a flow chart that guides you through the regulation. That's very handy if you're studying for CFI. So now we need to talk about what the differences are between the ACS, Airman Certification Standards here, and the PTS, Practical Test Standards. So the PTS was the original. There was actually flight test guides before those, but PTS was the first really regulatory document that said you must evaluate these tasks in this way. Before it was flight guides, and they said you should like do this kind of thing. So it's kind of loose, right? ACS is Airman Certification Standards, and it is a modern version of the PTS, right? So the PTS, there was a lot of cleanup work that had to be done there. So I'll explain the history of this because I think it's kind of important. For those of you who maybe don't know how it started or what it is, and then we can go into all this. So about 2010, 2011, I received an email, and the email was from Oklahoma City. They considered my previous company, we were a test prep provider, but we really weren't. We just had a piece of that. So anyway, they said, hey, we're going to do something with the knowledge test. You're welcome to come to Oklahoma City and participate in this meeting. So that was the beginning of what was going to be the ACS. So what happened was they were going to write 100,000 new test questions and drop them in. They'll wait till 100,000 when they're done and replace all of the questions in all the test banks across the board, maintenance, ATP, all of it. Currently, there were 17,000 test questions, and all those, they're going to write 100,000 new ones and put them in there, which to me was kind of good news, because this idea of knowing what's on the test, not a test if you know questions and answers, it's not a test, right? If you think it's a test, I don't know. It's not, when people come in and say, "Oh, I don't need to do any ground because I got 100 on my FOI," I just asked them like 5 questions, and they got a 0 on their understanding of the FOI. They could pass the test because they knew what the questions are going to be answered, but they really didn't know. Same with the FIA, Flight Instructor Airplane, or FII, Flight Instrument one, they don't know. So if they didn't know the questions and answers, they wouldn't be able to get more than 30% on that test, probably maybe 40. Something like that. So anyway, the FAA was getting tired of that too. And so they said, we're just going to do that. And then we'll just keep writing test questions. You'll never catch up. So for example, I'll give you an example. So I studied for the FAA ATP written exam. And it took me 5 days with Martha and John King by my side on a video. And I passed the test and I passed the flight test. Then I went to the UK and did the same thing. It took me 8 months of residential training to pass 16 different exams, because those are a whole deal. You cannot get the questions and answers, so you have to know, and they're complicated. Climatology is one of them, weather theory, all this stuff. And so, and there's negative marking. So and the tests are weighted. So a flight planning question might be 6 points, whereas what is critical angle attack might be half a point. So, and then if you guess and you get it wrong, you get negative points off. So it's a real test. So you only have 3 attempts to pass them. So it took 8 months to do that. Now, I'm not saying that's better. I'm just saying that's what we got. So the test scores aren't necessarily a reflection of what you know. So anyway, the ACS then, this was a big problem. So it was saying, well, that's okay that you're going to write all these new questions, because that helps sell my stuff, because we're about knowledge, right? Not just how to pass a test. We're not a Shepherd Air, right? So we don't do that. So there's a place for them, but that's not us. And so then they said, well, the issue we had was there's no test standard for the knowledge test at that time. There was no test standard. The people could just write what they wanted. They could say what's the A in the payoff checklist, or they could say how many satellites are in the constellation, anything they wanted to, right? And we have no way to really, it's kind of would say that's a terrible question. They would say, okay, like the previous, if you remember the area forecast, they would ask over Western Oklahoma at this time, what's this front going to do? Well, that's a geography test. There's no state names on there, so you had to know where. From geography, you had to know where Western Oklahoma was. So I said, that's a terrible question, right? You want to test the weather, not the geography. So there's that. So anyway, so what happened was that they agreed, and it's turned out they said, let's just write a test standard for it. Industry would write a test standard. And that became the beginning of the ACS. And that's why there are knowledge test codes in there. And so then John King said, well, now that we got everybody's attention, we can build risk management in there, because he's always been a big risk management guy. So they did that. And then some person, I don't know who it was, said, if we just copy the completion standards, then you've got a whole new testing document and everything can align. So if there's a test question in the test pool they want to write, it has to align to the standard. And if people are failing that a lot, we can correlate that and see, then that means we need to make a change to the handbook to have more knowledge or something. So there'd be a way to track all this. And that's what it became. So all the special emphasis areas in the PTSs got moved into risk management, into the ACSs, and that was the birth of the ACS. So the instrument training requirements. So when are the rest of the ACSs going to be out? That's a question I get a lot, because I have little birds in Washington and in Oklahoma City, and they tell me things sometimes. They are ready to go. I can tell you that. They're absolutely ready to go. They've been written and waiting for a long time. There was a holdup, a legal challenge to them. That's now, they think they got that done. So it could be any minute, but if you look at the past history, they would release them in June. June is past. So I don't know what that means. I have no indication that they're going to release anytime soon, but they would release the aviation instructor, ACS. They would release the others that are there. So there's 4 or 5 of them, all along with the aviation maintenance stuff. They're all written. So there's that. So let's look at instrument training requirements. These training requirements are always going to be in the FAR. So what are the training requirements? FAR 61.65 explains those. So I can show you quickly, because I don't want to bore you with regulations, but I do want to show you quickly. Let me change the share here. and I will get up the regulation so we can go right to it. And then we'll take a break here in a little bit, and I'll have a video for you, a fun video. It's about 5 minutes or less long. It'll just be for fun. All right, let me grab this now. Yeah, when I gained 2 pounds, I used this book that someone wrote called The Pilot's Diet. Yeah, I wonder who did that, and I used that. So I'm on that. Here's 6165. So in general, you have to already have a private pilot certificate or higher. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but what I'm going to do is go down and show you what has to be done. So aeronautical knowledge, you need to have this aeronautical knowledge. Either you have to take a home study course or the flight instructor has to give it. By the way, you CFIIs, the regulation for it will tell you later at the CFI level that you have to have been received aeronautical knowledge training in these areas. So when you go for your CFII, someone has to actually put these in your logbook and say they've done these. There's no home study course provision for that. So these got to be in there. These are the things you got to be trained on. So, and for you instrument people, it's there. For flight proficiency, it's these things. Doesn't seem like only 8 things you have to do. There's a lot in there though, right? And then there's aeronautical experience. And this is where I wanted to touch on a few things. So you need 40 hours of actual simulated time, but you only need 15 hours from an authorized instructor who holds an instrument rating airplane on their flight service certificate. If you think you're going to finish an instrument rating with 15 hours and 35 hours of the safety pilot, I think you're dead wrong. So remember that these regulations are built to satisfy all possible cases. Unlike other regulations, like from EPA that are highly stringent, these are loosey-goosey, right? So this is built, for example, I'll tell you how it was built for. So as a good example. So one of my students was Antoine Peugeot from the Peugeot car company. He had a French instrument rating along with other things. And so we wanted to do this instrument rating in the US. Well, he only needed 15 hours because he already had an instrument rating. So that was enough. And the rest of the time we could count from his French flight certificate. But if you don't have an instrument rating already, you're not going to finish in 15 hours. I don't think it's possible. But it's built for those cases, right? Of these 15 hours, you have to have 3 hours of instrument training time within 2 calendar months of the practical test. And you need a cross country. You're going to make an instrument cross country that's at least of 250 nautical miles. See, I think it's very interesting how the regulations read, because you'll never be able to get this, right? It's my argument with the FAA. We had an issue with the IPC some years ago, and they made it really difficult to be able to meet, and they didn't mean to do it. It was like it was only going to be good for like 2 months or so, the IPC, or you're staying current. And so they said, oh, we really didn't mean that, but because it's in the rule currently, we have to enforce upon it. And so I'm like, really? So you don't really mean it, but now you really have to enforce upon it, right? I said, well, what about this? I showed them 2 places. This was here and also in the private pilot section. A flight of, not at least, of exactly 250 nautical miles. For the private pilot, it says a flight of 150 nautical miles. And all the other regulations, it says at least or more than, something like that. Here is it of 250 nautical, not 250.1, 250 on the money. So anyway, they didn't like that when I pointed that out to them. But anyway, they said, oh, we'll get to that. So they put out legal interpretations, all that stuff. So then 3 different kinds of approaches at airports with use of navigation system, which is a legal interpretation I need to bring your attention to. All right, so what do I want to say? That's good enough for now. Let me go back to the other share, so we can then put it into what we need to put it into here. Okay, back to here. So there's been a recent legal interpretation because a lot of the examiners were insisting that these 3 different instrument approaches needed to be on 3 different navigation systems. So for example, one would be ILS, a second one would be a GPS. Then you couldn't use a GPS anymore, or WAS had to be what's the other thing? A VOR or something, an NDB, something like that. Well, the legal interpretation came out about 2 or 3 months ago, and it said, no, that's not at all true. It just has to be 3 different kinds of approaches. They could be the same navigation system for all we care, is what they said. And so so that's now been interpreted. So if you go out and you do an LPV approach, and then you do a GPS approach, and then you do a ILS approach or something else, that's 3 different kinds of approaches that we count. A localizer, that will count. So that's been by a legal interpretation. Also, the IFR cross country does not have to be 250 miles straight line distance. It just needs to be add up to be more than or 250 nautical miles or more. So if you're not going really far, what you want to do is you want to record the route into the remarks section. So record the route in your remarks section of the logbook. So Victor, here, that, and how you got there. So and make sure that adds up to at least 250, and you won't have any trouble, because otherwise it's going to be, well, how did you go? Well, I think we got a vector to here or that or whatever. So either go far or do that. Now, this is another really important section, and this can save you a lot of aggravation. And when I say aggravation, I mean not being able to take a practical test. So So if you're pursuing a commercial pilot certificate next, make sure that the required instrument tasks, they're here in this regulation 61-129A3I, which is 10 hours of instrument training, is done at the same time you're doing an instrument rating. So it's not good enough to just show your instrument rating as proof this was done. That's been by a legal interpretation, by the way. So now some DPs don't know about it, but some do, and most do. And so just because you have an instrument rating doesn't mean that you don't have to do these 10 hours. It's okay, the FAA says, if they were logged simultaneously with doing your instrument training here. So make sure that in your logbook that it's clear how you're both meeting the requirements for an instrument rating and for this thing. Otherwise, you're gonna have to do those 10 hours again, or find the instructor and have them annotate your logbook. So that's like, that's quite a bit, right? So make sure this gets done. So, and you say, how do you do it? Well, when you're doing these tasks, the 8 things I just showed you that you had to do, just also include this, say doing this regulation and doing this at the same time. Then it's pretty clear. Then people can add up 10 hours and you'll be all right. Okay, so you've got that. So this will save you a ton of aggravation if you can do that. We've had people come who have doing their commercial, and they can't find their instructors from the old days. And so we have to do the 10 hours of instrument training with them. By the way, because of the wording, 61-129A3I, which says 10 hours of instrument training, this has to be done by a CFII. So you can do, as a CFI, commercial training, but you can't do these 10 hours unless you have a CFII, because that's called instrument training. For the private pilot certificate, you have 3 hours of control of the airplane, sole reference to the flight instruments. That's not instrument training. That's controlled by flight instruments. But this is instrument training, like approaches, holds, that kind of thing. They go on and say that. All right, so that's when we identify the training, endorsements, and testing requirements for an instrument rating. So where do we find that? So let's look at it. So the training is always in the FAR, and we saw that. That was the section I just showed you. It has the aeronautical knowledge and the training and the experience. The endorsements are located in an advisory circular, and I want to show you that. It's here. And I also tell you which ones that you need at some point. So this is the instrument rating. So this is the AC, and in the back of it, there's an appendix. And that's what we're going to go. We're going straight to the appendix, which is the very end of the book, somewhere around here, right? So this is the appendix, sample endorsements. And if you go to instrument rating, you will see, in a second here, these are the required endorsements. These are by nomenclature. It's an AC kind of, it's not really anything to do with the endorsement. It's just a way to identify it. A38, that's the aeronautical knowledge test. This is if you, the instrument flight instructor, gave the instruction, because you can also have the student do a home study course, in which case you give a different endorsement. We'll show you. Flight proficiency for the practical test, that's this one. And then these are called prerequisites for the instrument rating practicals. I don't know why they put this in here, because it's already in here. It's the first 2 endorsements that appear. For every practical test you'll take for the rest of your life, A1 will always be required. It's here at the top. A1, this one, says that you've logged training within 2 calendar months and you're prepared for the practical test. That has to be given for every single practical test you take. This one may or may not be required. Review deficiencies identified in knowledge test. If you didn't have to take a knowledge test, or if you got 100%, you don't need to give this. All right, these are required for this is required for every single practical test. So no matter what, you have to have that in there somewhere. So look for that. Now, if you didn't give the ground instruction for the instrument rating, then you go way down here to additional. I put these in the outline, so you don't have to remember any of this stuff. So we go here to additional ones. After the instructor ones, you'll see additional ones. after helicopter, additional endorsements, and you go down to about 80 something, A 80 something, A 80 something. Here, 82 is a review of the home study course curriculum. You'd give this so they can take the test. Okay, so that's in lieu of the other one. Okay, back to the outline for a second. I told you it's a bit technical, so hopefully it won't be that tedious here as we go through. For the so these are the correct endorsements we just saw, and identify the testing requirements. Well, that's in the the ACS for the instrument rating. So let's go to the instrument rating ACS. If you're new, if you don't have an instrument rating already, in helicopter or something else, you do everything that's in the ACS except for with their notes, right? So let's take a look at that, what I mean by that. I remember all the front matter is reduced here quite a bit because they put all the stuff in risk management. So there's no special emphasis areas, any of that. It's a lot easier to read, I can tell you that. So if you go to the first area of operation, I want to show you something here. This area of operation 1, task A, it's required. And these are the knowledge codes right from the IFR test, from the knowledge test. So, and then any question that's written has to be one of these three things about pilot qualifications or risk management. And then they go into that bucket right there. So if plenty of people fail on this or that, then they'll maybe write more content or place more emphasis on it or whatever. So that's that. These are the skills. So I want to draw your attention to something very important. It's notes. So I'm going to move down to the non-precision approach. If I can get there, should be soon. Yes, okay. So there's a note here. So let's take 30 seconds and make sure that we really understand it, because this can save you a lot of aggravation too. Note. It says see Appendix 7. So say, okay, that sounds okay. Now, when we go there, it's going to be like, well, this is kind of nonsense. I already know that, until you don't. So let's have a look. So now we look here and say aircraft requirements. Well, I have an airplane that can do this, so I don't need to read any further, right? No, we keep reading, because here you're going to find something very important. This tells you that, if I find it, yes, here, non-precision approach. The evaluator will select non-precision approaches representative type you'll do. It says now, right here is the point I want to get across, which right here. The applicant must accomplish at least 2 non-precision approaches. One must include a procedure term, or in the case of GPS, a TAA procedure. So you've got to do a pilot navigation approach. At least one has to be flown without the use of the autopilot. And then the other, one is expected to be flown with reference to backup partial panel instruments, depending on the aircraft. So here, now if you're doing an IPC, by the way, an instrument proficiency check, you're bound to the same standards in the ACS. So you've got to do these things too. So you've got to find an approach you can do a procedure term for. The other thing which is kind of problematic is the circling approach. So circling to land, circle to land. So let me grab that thing. Just a second. These are the other appendix, okay. So let me go to that for a second. It'll be landing off of here. Circling approach. I think it's probably here. Yeah, circling approach. So this is when you land off. If the runway is not the one straight in front of you, and you've got to go to a different one, it's got a circling approach, right? That's what this is. But I want you to say, so you've got to do one. It's required, right? So the question is, how far do you have to take it, right? That's always the big, nice question. So let me show you what it says. Let's look at the skill side. Let's look here. So remember, you've got to do this. So this is difficult in some places to actually find this to be done. And no simulators, unless they're wraparound things, are authorized to do circling approaches. So visually maneuver to the base or downwind leg appropriate. So you've got to go to the base or downwind leg. You can't just say, I'll go to the missed approach point. And that's kind of where we're circled. You have to actually do it. And this can be very problematic. For example, if it's a VFR traffic pattern and you're doing an instrument approach, or maybe a non-towered airport, and the traffic pattern is on the other side, not your side, and it says on your approach plate, you have to circle on the non-traffic side, you can't do it. You can't do it because you can't fly in contrary to the terms prescribed in the VFR traffic pattern if it's VFR. So what do? You know, it becomes really a challenge. Now you can't just make right traffic when everybody making left traffic for a VFR runway. That's left traffic. So there is a provision within the regulation which says that if ATC authorizes it, you can do it. So you have to ask them and see if they'll authorize it for you at a non-towered airport. If they do it, then you're good. Otherwise, you'll have to sort of fly over the field some 500 feet over, change minimums. I don't know, but it's going to be difficult to meet this. It's going to be really hard to meet this. So this is always a challenge on like an IPC. Okay, back to the outline for a second. I told you it's very technical, but we'll see. Let's move on down here. We already talked about this, important notes. I put these in for you. Circling, we talked about that. Now we look at the flight instructor instrument airplane, PTS. It's a PTS, right? Yeah. Let's see. Special emphasis areas are there. So there's 13 or 15 of them, something like that. One of them is, you know, positive change of flight controls. You can look at them later, but it's in the front matter. Well, and then 2 to 3 approaches are required, and you must use the recommended hold entry. So you don't, in the regular instrument rating, it's not required for certain that you use the recommended hold with teardrop, parallel, direct. But in the PTS, it requires you to do it. So that's that. We'll look at the document here. I have it up here, so we'll look at it. But just some overview first. And then to know there are 6 things you can do with your CFII. That's it. So if you look at what you can do with your CFI, it's a lot. I mean, a lot. And so, and there's a lot of combinations. You can take rotorcraft people, helicopter to airplane, single engine land. You can take glider people, balloon people. You can give flight reviews. You can solo students. You can, there's like, if I had to guess, there's somewhere around probably 60 different endorsements that you can give for various things, maybe more. This one, you got 6 things. That's it, brother. So you can do instrument training first. Let's get up this thing again. Pen here. I like this pen. I don't know why. Instrument rating training and recommendation. So you can recommend someone for instrument rating, endorse them for that, and you can give them training. That's one thing you can do. That's an obvious thing. You can do an IPC and a certain proficiency check. And if you do that, do know that this is why you can't teach yourself this stuff. If you think you can teach yourself this stuff, I think you're crazy. You crazy, because this is like too complicated, right? Even me, I get sometimes wrapped around the axle here and there with something, right? Like, oh God, I didn't know that. Like I didn't know, I'll give you something I didn't know. So I didn't know that well, this was about a year ago, up to a year ago. I thought you could combine, if you had, for this commercial, if you wanted to do solo, 10 hours of solo, or you can have an instructor on board performing the duties of PIC. I thought you could combine those. You can have like 2 hours solo. You cannot. It doesn't say, it says solo or it doesn't say or any combination thereof like it does other places. So for years I got that wrong. So there you go. So it does happen. So this stuff is complicated. Well, anyway, let's go with this IPC. If you do an IPC, you double eyes, you need to be aware of something. You are required to use the ACS to do it. And you say, well, what do? I just do whatever I want to do. No, you don't. This is what you're going to do in a second. It's very not obvious. You have to go to the appendix here. Maybe here. Here's the appendix. Instrument proficiency check. These are the areas of operation and the task you must do. And those notes all apply. So what I have people do in our double I class is make an IPC for the area that they teach in, right? And so that's, yes, exactly, very Southern term, wrapped around the axle. Yeah, I have a whole bunch of those too. By the way, I put up all these sayings, which might be fun to go through. Like, if you ever hear "bless your heart," you know that it could be good if you gave someone, like you did something really nice for someone, they'll say that, but generally it means you're kind of like not all there, you know. Don't like "bless your heart" too much. I want to hear that one. Let's see. Let me grab up this thing here. I'll give you a few more while we've got a little break. I'm going to show you the video too. Oh, so anyway, let's carry on with this for a second, so I don't lose the momentum. Here, this is these. So here, I'll give you a few so you'll like it. If you have some more, send them to me. I reckon it do. Pour the coal to her. Pour the coal to her. It don't make no never mind. Put that in the poke. It means put that in the bag. Yes, sirree, Bob. He knowed that. He definitely knowed that, right? Yorn, hisn, and Herm. So there are some funny ones that come from there. I went to a Chinese restaurant in Elkins, West Virginia, where I'd spent a lot of time. and the mom and dad are in the back. They speak Chinese, right? Great. That means food's going to be good. The boys that were serving and kind of helping cook, they come out and they had a southern accent. And so they said, what would you like to eat? And I told them, right, I'm like, I can't believe what I'm. And then he asked me this, you want gravy on that? Do you want gravy on that? No, I don't want. That way, mom, make it. How she make it home? There's that. Okay, back to the real deal here now. I have to say that you can. So the IPC, instrument proficiency check. You can do a CFI II training and recommendations. So that means that you can. As soon as you have your II, you can give. You can give training towards another CFII. You don't have to wait 2 years. The only way you have to wait 2 years is they're doing that as an initial flight instructor certificate, which we're going to talk briefly about here in a second. You can also give, so you can do one of those. You can do a ground instructor recent experience endorsement. All ground instructors have to have an endorsement to say they're proficient to teach, and they have to give a certain amount of teaching within so many days, so many months to keep their to be able to do it. If not, they have to get an endorsement to say they're still competent from one of us. So anyway, you can give that. You can give initial CFII training and rotation if you're qualified. We'll talk about that right after we talk about the last one. You can give the 10 hours of instrument training required for the commercial pilot certificate. There's the regulation. Yeah. So that ain't Southern, I see. Initial CFII training. So in order to give any training for an initial, that means your CFI, typically what most people don't realize is you can take any of these 3 tests as your first test. You can take CFI airplane single engine, you can take instrument airplane, or you can take multi-engine instructor. You can take any one of those as your first one. And that's called an initial, right? So if you want to train someone who doesn't have a flight instructor certificate already and is coming in to do the II, you will have to have 2 years and 200 hours or meet the other, there's a couple other requirements you could get it if you worked at a 141 school. So otherwise, if it's coming in, if the person already has a flight instructor certificate, that's an additional rating. It's not an initial, so you can do that training right away. As soon as you have your certificate in your hand, you could start that minute and give them that training. Okay, so let's go on down here. This is like 20 some odd things. So the training, there's a lot of training here. So we're going to look at the PTS quickly. But this is the addition. If you're doing it, I just only codified this as not codified. I put this down as just as an additional rating, not as an initial. If you do it, by the way, as an initial, it makes the test kind of easier, right? Because you can only do 6 things. I just showed you what those 6 things were. So your knowledge of the endorsements is way restrained, not a lot of complicated scenarios. Then it's procedural. Instrument rating doesn't require any really huge amount of aerodynamics and, putting to all these different disciplines like, aeromedical factors, you have some of that, but all these various disciplines, and weather theory, but you already know most of that, right? So it is a lot easier. Then you're just tested in addition to those instrument things, the FOI. That's it, nothing else. So it makes that test as an initial a little easier. Then when you add on your airplane single engine later as an additional rating, you don't have to do the FOI again. And so it does take that burden off it because it seems to be an awful lot to study, right? So these are the regulations that are going to talk about it. 61-191 is additional flight instructor ratings. It's going to refer back to eligibility. And I put these things in here, which means that you have to take a knowledge test. Ooh, right there, regulation. It's called the FII, Flight Instructor Instrument Airplane Test. And that also then that regulation, this regulation points to back to the instrument rating regulation, which says you have to have aeronautical training in the same areas that an instrument pilot needs to have. So I think I can show these to you. Let me look at something. So let's pause just for a second. I want to bring up some things. And we'll get going here with the rest of it. So grab this stuff here. I need to go to Dropbox, so that's, so he put it as a link to me. So I think I showed you. So I'll show you some, this is just for fun. We're just at a break point. I can say hi to you, see who's in the room. We have 60 people in the room, so that's good. Let's see who's in here, some other people. All right, I'm gonna show you. For those of you who know, I'm kind of on a fitness journey. I have been for a long time, and not a long time, a couple years. I used to be really big boy. Woo! So now not so much. So then I get crazy if I like 1 pound. So I want to show you where I run. So if you ever come to this town, you'll be able to see it. So we're just going to take a few minutes and let this play out. And sometimes I talk, sometimes I don't. This is the beginning of I'll narrate it myself. I go, we'll just do it and then we'll come back to the content in a second. Maybe. This is Lincoln Road. It's a pedestrian walkway with botanical gardens in the middle of it. About a mile long, shops, restaurants, that kind of thing.
This is the beach walk. It's a serpentine path. It's very pretty.
It's about a mile.
Sand dunes and the beach is right over there. We'll see in a second.
Very short trips, so don't worry. So it's not 8 miles long.
Here. All right. It's 15th Street Beach. And Ocean Drive. It's over here.
So this is our entertainment district.
All
Art Deco buildings.
So Lummis Park, and there's some of the Art Deco buildings.
They're really
That one,
pretty.
Cardozo,
These were built in 39,
that's owned
38.
by Gloria Estefan and her husband, the one on the end there. This is the beach walk. More of the beach walk. We can see the ocean here in a minute. Made it. This is from beach walk. Come through the sand dunes. And you don't get hit by a golf cart.
We're almost done.
Lifeguard towers. Some down there. No beach people, not so many. We'll get a little closer. This is our beach. We have sargassum, which is seaweed this time of year. When the wind comes from the east and collects some beach, so they clean it up. Usually in the morning, but there's sea turtles too, so you have to make sure there's sea turtles. It's breeding for them. And there's a sandbar where those people are standing. It's a sandbar, and it's riptide. Past that if there's any wave. So come here, don't go past the sandbar. Look up to the tower. A very busy day. That's the tides. You can tell that's the tallest Art Deco building in South Beach. It's 10 stories. They would perch on the top. They thought they were crazy when they first built it. No one would do it. Because up to 3 floors, you have to have an elevator. So that's why I have all these buildings with 3 floors. And we're approaching my rock. It's right there. It's on Ocean Drive. That's the Cleveland Hotel. Leslie is in yellow. You can see the Congress Hotel. Very clean Art Deco lines. Very square, very big verticals. It's very calm. That's the rock. Stretch on that. This is the Art Deco Welcome Center here on 10th, which is Barbara. I never could say her name. Capitman. She was original founder of the Art Deco Conservation League. Anyway, she's responsible for all these beautiful buildings. This is Espinola. See Miami Vice before you've seen this place. So it's a beautiful street. It's a Spanish architecture street. It's gorgeous. That was the first scene Miami Vice was up there. Anyway, there's that. Espinola Way. Here's our McDonald's with a walk-up window in the streets, Washington Avenue. Then we'll come around the side. I run down through there. And this is Lincoln Road, Lincoln Mall. It's a pedestrian walkway. Lots of shops, restaurants, that kind of thing. It's here. It's the old Bank of America building. Big tall thing. And this is Lincoln Mall, Lincoln Road. It's just the whole street goes for about a mile. Shops and bars and restaurants. Supposed to have it. Here we go. Let's start running. In the middle of Lincoln Road, there are themed botanical gardens. This was designed by Morris Lapidus in 1960, 50 something, 60 something. Anyway, he made pools, very art, it's called Miami Modern Design. Like you see fountains. And up here you see some structures that are kind of, I don't know, modern art. Sometimes it don't seem like they serve much of a function. But there's a nice look at it. There's that.
All right, there you go. So that's a bit of where it goes. I like it because I do the same distance, the same place all the time. But it's different each time because it depends if it's a weekend or if it's party people in town or if there's an event. It's always interesting. So that's kind of the. Yes, there were evil clouds out there that I got rained on. I did. The scooter went down on a Washington and 15th. That's I don't have a video of that, but there's a big hole. I paid the price for that too. Okay, back to the outline. We're done with that. So let me grab everything up here. Get rid of that. Let's go here. Let's zoom. One moment, we're getting things lined up here. Okay, where's the share? Hello. Here, got it. Okay. All right, back to the outline for a second. Not a second. I'll bring up the PTS, which I think is kind of timely right now. So, and then there's a few bonus things here. So let me go to the actual PTS for flight instructor instrument airplane, which is this one, double I. Let's click. Okay, so this is it. This is the current one. And then you'll find there's an enormous amount of front matter here. There's a lot of stuff before you get into any tasks. You can see what the references are, just record of changes, because this goes on and on and on and on and on and on. So anyway, the front matter, but I will take you to the special emphasis areas, which are way down here, right here. So these are supposed to emphasize throughout the practical test, all these 15 things. My favorite one, of course, is number 15. Other areas deemed appropriate to any phase of the practical test. That could be anything, right? I don't like that open-ended stuff, but that's what these are the special emphasis areas here. So be sure you're getting training around these things. Some of them take care of themselves, like positive aircraft control, and hopefully you're always flying the airplane. It's not flying you. Positive exchange of flight controls. By the way, if that's your mantra, if you're flying an airplane by using the autopilot and not paying attention to what's happening and hoping that all that's going to work out, you're going to get really surprised one day. So you need to be part of that thing. You need to be in the loop, in the big old tight feedback loop, not a loose one, a tight feedback loop. Don't use it to buy time because you're behind. That's a really bad strategy. Is if you're in an airplane, it's too fast for you then, right? So you can't use an autopilot to do something you're not fully capable of doing yourself, right? So you always want to be sure that that's going on, right? And then you have tasks down here. Also tells you if you can use a flight training device depending on certain things. So unsatisfactory, satisfactory, and eventually we get to the actual meaning of it, right? Which is going to be right after the automation. Should be. Oh, by the way, if you have an existing certificate, so let's say that you have, like for example, most of you, when you come into this test, you're going to have a flight instructor certificate, right? So you're going to have AP airplane. You're going to have flight instructor airplane, some airplane rating. That means you don't have to do any of task 1, which is going to make you happy because that's the fundamentals of instructing. Oh, you don't have to do any of 4 either. So, and you have selected tasks. These you have to do. So you can go down through each area of operation to see, but this is what you have to do, right? If you want to add right here, addition of an instructor rating to an existing flight certificate, you need to do these things, right? So if you're doing it as initial, you have to do everything, right? Like we talked about. So if you're reinstating, these are like you let your instructor certificate lapse, then you want to renew this double I thing, which renews everything, by the way. Once you do one test, everything renews that you have. Then you do these things, right? That's where those tasks are. All right. Good. All right. So let's go back to the other outline. So you've seen, and then the actual tab, they look a little different, the PTS things. Let's just go past the FOI first into some technical subject thing, something like an approach. I know it's making you dizzy. It makes me dizzy too. So, too bad. All right, non-precision approach. And so here's what you have to do, right? And these are, you notice there's no knowledge areas. It just says the same thing. It exhibits instructional knowledge, the elements of the non-precision by describing. And every single thing will say exhibits the same thing. So that this has been completely replaced with exactly what needs to be, what specifically needs to be done. And then the skills are down here on common errors, right? And then that you actually do this approach. Now you notice that there isn't any plus minus 100 feet. There isn't any half scale, 3/4 scale deflection, the localizer. None of that is here. And that's because those standards for you, if you're a double I, are in the instrument rating ACS. They just didn't put them here, but you're subject to the same ones. So that's where if you're looking for the minimums and what you have to do, you'll find it descriptive here, but you won't find the completion standards. Well, the same with the flight instructor. For steep turns, you're not going to find it. You're not going to find plus minus 100 feet, plus minus 10 degrees, and plus minus 10 knots. You're not going to find that. You have to go to the commercial pilot or private pilot one to find that. Same here, you have to go to the instrument rating one to find it. So that's something good. All right, and then again, I'm not going to bore you with going to these regulations, but you can go right here. I've put them in here for you. So if you're doing a double I, this is your training. These are the endorsements. It's from the AC, A44 and A1 and possibly A2. A2 is a knowledge test deficiencies if you didn't get 100%. So that's these two. You need these two endorsements to take the test, and possibly that one. So then the testing requirements I just showed you. If you have flight instructor instrument airplane, then you look for that AP in the table, and it tells you what tasks have to be completed and which ones don't have to be completed. So, and again, remember that these precision and non-precision approaches need to have this combined thing, which is no autopilot, one of them, no radar vectors on one of them, that kind of thing. All right, so now let's take a look at some interesting stuff. And I'll catch up with some of the people that are in the room here. Yeah, so if you look at Google Earth and you look around just past 15th Street and Washington Avenue going north, maybe you'll see that hole in the pavement. It's pretty big. I don't know how I didn't see it, but why I didn't. So I don't go so fast anymore, but I do take it out often. Here's some bonus content. So if you're doing, maybe you have an instrument rating already, and you're trying to stay current, it's a really difficult thing. So unless you have a flight training device that's near you, it's to do it in an airplane is going to be tough if you don't have a safety pilot. So if you don't have a safety pilot, then you basically got to be IMC, right? Because you can't count the approach in VFR conditions, right? So then the question posed in a legal briefing was, how far does it have to be IMC before the approach will count? All right, so for example, you're on this approach and you get near the final approach fix, you're about ready to let down and it becomes VFR. You can see the runway, you can see, then what? Doesn't count. But if any of it to the final approach fix, as long as there's IMC past the final approach fix of any distance, even a second or two, you can count the entire approach for your 6 approaches in the past 6 months. So without putting on the hood. So that's important. There's one other thing to follow up on this too. And that is that there's another question, which is how far do you have to take this approach before it can be counted? So in other words, let's say that you come down the approach and there's someone coming the other way, I don't know, in a non-towered airport, and you have to leave the approach. Does it count? The answer is no. So you have to take the approach to either the DA, decision altitude, or the missed approach point, or to a landing, right? It does count. The legal interpretation does say that if a controller breaks the approach off early for you, for traffic or for some reason, you can do it. Yeah. So, and then let me answer some questions here. So let me move. Harold, I'll go from the bottom up. Our school just got a Redbird AATD, yes, on this week. Can you say IPC? Yes, you can give one in there. Remember, you can't do the circling approach. So you still have to do this. You have to go out to do a circle. So you cannot do the circling approach in the Redbird unless on Redbird's letter that comes with that sim, if it has enough visuals to wrap around, then it will be approved for circling. Otherwise, it will not be. So that's what we used to do at Advantage. We had a G1000 sim. It was approved for everything but circling. So we would do all the training there. We'd save one approach, go out and do the GPS approach back to to Palo Alto and have a circle to that. By the way, let me give you a way to circle for your double eyes. This is the kind of stuff that comes out when you've been around the horn a little bit, right? And you've been burned. Like if you ever fly with me together, it'll be one of the most efficient flights you've had. I combine things and I don't go very far. I start getting homesick if I go more than 10 miles from my native airport, right? I don't like going 50, 60, 70 miles. And in Palo Alto, you have to go more than 50 miles to go where there's instrument approaches if you want to do a lot of training, unless you come with me. Then we'll do most of them in VFR conditions. The controller won't even know we're doing them. We'll be below class B and it'll be very efficient. We'll get a lot of approaches done very quickly. So one of the things that happens though on an APC is how do you get this circle in? Right? Because now if you look at the GPS approach to 3-1 in Palo Alto, it's a straight in for runway 3-1, has minimum somewhere around 500 some feet. And then the controller is going to say, if you want to circle for the other runway and it's not IFR conditions and the wind's not from there, they're going to tell you no, right? They're going to be like, no, you can't do that. You can't land with a big old tailwind. It's not going to happen. So how do you do it? I'm going to tell you how. Are you ready? you're going to come down to circling minimums. You're going to do this hopefully in VFR conditions. And you're going to ask the controller for a left or right, depending on the traffic pattern, overhead brake. What is that? You may have heard that before. It's in the AIM, but basically it means that you're going to go at the approach speed of your airplane, and you're going to overfly the airport at or midfield or wherever you say. You're going to brake over the numbers, and then you're going to join right or left traffic and fly a downwind base final. Basically, going to do a 360 is what you're going to do. That's a circle because you got onto the downwind, you got onto the base, and you got onto the final. You're fine, right? You got the base and the downwind covered. So depending on which way the traffic is, in Palo Alto, the traffic is right traffic mostly. So it would be a right brake at the numbers for 3-1. And if they say brake over the numbers, you're cleared you can do that. So so that's how you can get in a circle. So I'm telling you how you can get in one. So if you have a runway, doesn't have a circling approach, and you need to get it in, just do an overhead brake, right? That's the best way to do it. Is there a point which you must go before ATC breaks you off? Something happens a lot. They'll release you past the IF. You have to be past the final approach fix. So for Brad, he's asking that in the chat. I will say the chat, you get a copy of the chat so that, you know that, you get a copy of the chat. So let me just go through the rest of them here. Yeah, so anyway, a swimming traffic control tower. Those lifeguard stations do look like that. Yeah, they look like a swimming traffic ATC tower, right? Okay, let's see if there's any. As someone who, Andrew, completed UK CPL. Yeah, so you can see that. Great. Okay, so I'm pretty much coming to the end here. Yeah, wrapped around the axle. It is kind of funny, isn't it? That's they say things like too when it's not going to happen. They'll say that dog ain't going to hunt. That dog's not going to hunt. That dog won't hunt. Say that. They say a lot of things down there. So anyway, these are our CFII lesson plans. They're about not quite a year old, so they'd be useful for you. They're there. Let's move on past. The systems book will be done here in the next day or so. It's just putting the ISBN number on it now. We had a meeting on it. We already got the ISBN number, so it should be out. You guys will get an email about it. It's a 172S model systems guide that I rewrote all the schematic, the electrical system diagrams, and taught you basic electricity in there, and you'll understand how the systems work when you have that book. This is a Teach Me Fly. I'm going to do one for the instrument rating at some point. I don't know when, but it's going to be at some point. I just don't know. It's so procedural and boring that I don't know. This is more interesting, but there you go. And then we're going to have advanced for-flight features on September 3rd. I hope to. I don't know who I'll bring in with me. It'll be somebody, or I'll do it myself. I know enough there. I have found some really cool features that they're not widely known. Then we're going to do a pinch hitters course. This would be good for anybody. So get the word out on this one because this is going to help non-pilots be able to do certain things. They'll be able to crash the airplane. That's true. You'll be able to land, but you will crash, but it won't be a bad crash, right? There's no way I can teach you to land until I can teach you how to land, right? It takes that amount of time, but I can teach you how to get on the ground and have it leave a mark, but not a bad one. Okay, and that's so we're going to do this. That makes people feel a little better. They know they can get on the ground. And then the other thing that we teach you is like what kind of assistance that you can provide, like what you can do as a non-pilot, some tools like how to read a chart a little bit, just a little bit, how to get frequencies off of it, how to know where you are, how to use a GPS with direct to function, how to use the radio, how to set up the comms, things like that. We'll be doing in that pinch hitter class. For our membership site, if you don't belong, join. So it gives you access to some of the power hours. The paid one over here, that has all the powers. This will be 103rd one we've done. So that's interesting. Interesting as hell right there. And I don't care who you are. So we do a lot of accents and things in the class. It's kind of fun to play around. Some people will have their own and perfected some. We do have a class in September. It's coming up in a couple weeks. So it's just enough time to get in that remotely or in person. Yeah, very Southern term. Yes, sir. And there's one seat left in Palo Alto. It's pretty much sold out. Let's get busy there. And 2 live stream spots. November, we have a Palo Alto class, and we do have an Opalaka class. I don't know when it is, but I will put it on here. Then these are the instrument. They're kind of getting full too. So there's that. All right. I think that's what I got for you. And then you can click that link if you want to see all the class dates. So that's what I've got for you today. I hope that, I know that's kind of a lot of technical content and all of that, but at least we got through that. And I'm going to go get this vaccine thing. I'm going to be late for it, but I don't think they're going to care, to be honest. They shouldn't care. If they do, oh, well, I guess they're going to care. So, or I won't get it. I won't be terribly disappointed if I don't. It's something I'm collecting them now. So that's it. I'm going to save the chat now, and then we'll see you next week. So that's the end of the show for today. See you later.
Welcome to Miami. Bouncing in the club with the heat is on all night on the beach till the break of dawn. I'm going to Miami. Welcome to Miami. Rainstorms ain't nothing to mess with, but I can't feel a drip on the strip. It's a trip, ladies.